Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick, the heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Howe, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5, takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Showing the toughness for 6. Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Throws to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart. Now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Paystor in the end zone for the touchdown. They are going to play for left-handed. Was walking out on the run and threw it left-handed. Nard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
Hey guys, welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Vlog podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotti, here with you guys as always. Coming at you tonight solo, trying to get it shared into a couple other groups here before we get rolling. And I know I promised you guys that tonight was going to be a breakdown of the 2026 recruiting class for the Tar Heels. Well, plans had to shift a little bit after some of the news that rolled in earlier today on the transfer portal front for Carolina. And so I'm here to discuss that news tonight. I want to hear your reactions in the comments as well. And if some of you guys give those to me, I will read those here throughout the night. But Carolina losing a significant piece to the transfer portal, one that I don't really think anybody looked at and said, until late in the season really was a threat to leave. And then we learned earlier today that this was basically the plan for about a month. One of these defections is a guy that had been sitting on this for the last month of the season, and he ends up making the move today to go to the transfer portal. And so now Carolina, with a few losses on the transfer portal, side of things. Again, all these guys having to wait until January 2nd to officially enter the transfer portal. But still, guys just gone ahead, jumping in now and just jumping in terms of putting their names in. So, I mean, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what results out of this. If Carolina is able to hold on to some of these guys eventually, with the early notice that these guys are going to be leaving, you would hope that some of these guys, potentially Carolina is able to hold on to. But at this point, I can't tell you that I think Carolina is going to hold on to any of these guys. And let's start with the most significant that we've had enter so far. So this isn't the first entry that Carolina has had into the transfer portal. They've had a few others, most notably at wide receiver. They've had a few guys enter the portal, including Chris Culliver. That was certainly a guy, we talked about him a little bit recently. He's certainly a guy that, played a little bit for Carolina, was able to sort of take the top off of defenses. And you would have thought that maybe could have been bound for a little bit of a bigger role here this season coming up after, not factoring in this year. But ultimately, it seemed like with what the staff was telling us by not playing him towards the end of the season, we knew that was going to eventually happen. The one that happened today that I think everybody's talking about is Khmori House, the starting linebacker for the Tar Heels, enters the transfer portal. This is following some tweets that really made it seem like this was a possibility. Maybe, we hadn't thought about it nearly as much. Maybe we had thought about this as possibly maybe being able to happen at some point for him. But I think most of us thought that, this was going to be a guy that stuck around here in Chapel Hill, especially early on in the season when you saw how productive he was early in the year. I think some of us thought, yeah, this guy's going to hang around here. He's going to be a part of this linebacking core for the next couple of years. And this will be a really strong foundation for Carolina to build upon. That is not the case. Now he ends up moving on. And, it was a really weird finish to the season for him. And now I think we're getting some light potentially shed on why it was such a weird finish to the season for him. I think that this is certainly, not the not the most shocking thing in the world, mainly because, look, man, this is the modern era of college football. It's not shocking to see anybody enter the transfer portal. But then you get a report from Grant Chachere earlier today. This coming from the guy who covers the Tar Heels for Sports Illustrated. And credit to him, man, for getting this scoop. But he said, as expected, Khmori House is entering the transfer portal. It's been known that he has been seeking to enter the portal for about the last month or so. This was backed up by a couple other people. Jacob Turner from Tar Heel 24/7 basically said the same thing. And so here we are with Carolina's starting linebacker, a guy who led the team in total tackles this year, entering the transfer portal. And so now, Carolina not only is going to have to figure out what they're going to do to replace him, but remember that Andrew Simpson is gone due to graduation, and Mekhi Bayor is going to be gone as well. Mekhi Bayer. I don't know why I pronounced it that way. That was the way I pronounced it when we first got him and didn't know his name. But now, he with all three of those guys gone, you're talking about a linebacking core where the guy that has the most experience in that linebacking core is a dude that played 60 snaps this year. And that's Tamir Hickman-Collins, who, was okay in some of the moments when he was on the field, didn't really flash all that much this season. And so, you're counting on guys like him. You're counting on somebody like Jonathan Agamadu, guy who was really a big special teams guy. Both of those guys, him and Hickman-Collins, both finished with 10 total tackles on the season. So, look, they were a part of the special teams unit. Hickman-Collins was a guy that got some run a little bit later in the year, but I can't tell you that anybody is overly confident in that group. And then you look at the rest of the linebacking room, and it's a lot of guys that, have potential. They could end up being something for Carolina, but they just haven't played. Evan Bennett, that's another guy that, it wouldn't shock me if we saw his name in the transfer portal because he just hasn't played in his first 2 years at Carolina. That was also a guy that was recruited by Mac Brown. Then you get some of the guys that were brought in last year as a part of that 2025 recruiting class late. Tyler Hauser, Lance Pascal, Jake Bauer, most of these guys. Now, Lance Pascal was a guy that I think got a jersey every single time out. But the other two guys, Hauser and Bauer, both guys were on and off the field this year in terms of getting jerseys for games this season. So, yeah, both of those guys are, probably, they're guys that who knows, how much they're going to be trusted to come in and really make that much of a leap. Not sure, how much they trust some of the other guys in this room to make much of a leap either. So, it's going to be tough, man. I'm not going to lie to you. I think that at this point, Carolina is going to have to go into the transfer portal. They're going to have to get a starting linebacker out of the portal. It's something that, again, I don't think catches us completely off guard because of the post on social media, but now it sets up for a very difficult portal for Carolina in terms of linebackers because you've got to get at least two, you would think, guys that can contribute. Maybe one of them only becomes a starter. Maybe you see a guy like Hickman-Collins step up or Jonathan Agamadu, something like that. But you're feeling like you kind of need that Andrew Simpson and you kind of need that Mekhi Bayor in that can back up and potentially play significant snaps I just don't know that you're going to be able to get that from this group. I think you're going to probably have to go into the transfer portal. So we talk about the positions that are most important. Quarterback is definitely the most important. There's no doubt about that. And we still have to wait and see how many guys Carolina is going to take at that position. I know they just brought in Travis Burgess, from the high school ranks. And that's the other thing, in terms of the true freshman linebackers that are coming in. I mean, yeah, there's going to be opportunity for those guys as well. We thought there was going to be opportunity for them well before this. So to me, it means that they probably will go into the transfer portal. I think there is going to be, some hope for guys like DQ Forkpa and Calvin Thomas, who signed yesterday, to come in and make immediate impacts. Some of the other guys a little bit further down in the recruiting class, maybe Carolina not holding their breath on those guys necessarily being contributors next year. But I think, yeah, there's some hope that one of those two guys comes in, really burns it up, and Carolina, can look to that group. Because got to be honest with you, just what we've seen from the guys like Hickman Collins, who was a low-end recruit at Florida State, and from Jonathan Agamadu, I don't know if that is necessarily going to present the next guy for Carolina at linebacker. So I think the portal is going to be huge. I think the incoming freshmen are going to be huge for Carolina. They need to step up. And so that position is certainly one that's going to be filled. The other one going to need to be filled. The other one that I think is very important to talk about is the last one that we had earlier today or earlier this evening, the one that I just put up on the website. If you guys haven't read it, make sure you go and check it out. The one about Johnny Norwood, who transfers from the Carolina offensive line. Johnny Norwood, a guy that never really got run this year. To a certain extent, I don't really understand why. This was a guy that last year started a game for Carolina along the offensive line. Now, it was a start in the bowl game. He was not great in that lone start, but it was someone that had starting experience. And so I thought maybe he was a guy that would factor in at some point, especially, with all of the guys that they went through at left tackle, with some of the struggles that Ja'Kai Moore had at right tackle, but they never got far enough down on the depth chart to get to Johnny Norwood. So he was a guy that was buried on the depth chart. I totally understand why he decides, you know what, forget it. If I'm not playing, then I'm entering the transfer portal. And so he goes in this evening, and now you're looking at an offensive line. Already lost William Boone to the transfer portal. You're losing 5 guys along the offensive line to graduation this year. And so now you look around and you say, where is Carolina getting all these bodies from? They did add a decent amount of guys yesterday, in the 2026 recruiting class, a decent amount that signed. But the thing is that a lot of those guys, a lot of the best guys from this class are guys on the interior of the offensive line. Dayron Parks, who flipped yesterday, Will Conroy, Zion Smith, Anthony Hall. Those guys are all guys on the interior of the offensive line. And so then you're looking at a guy like Nick Fiamora, who, is expected, I think, to sign early or is expected to enroll early and be there in January. And JB Shabazz, who, we'll have to see whether or not he's expected to do the same thing. And those are guys that could factor in. But ideally, you don't want to have to start a true freshman, especially game 1 of the season. We saw Carolina did it this past year. Now, again, that's a much different situation because I believe that, the reason why Aiden Buchanan struggled in that first game of the year and Carolina, for some reason, this staff never went back to him, never really gave him much of a chance. The rest of the season, which is mind-blowing to me with the guys that they rotated through out there at left tackle. He struggled because he got there in the summer. He got there in June. He was not able to actually get on the field with the team until August, and I really think that had an effect on him. I think he's someone who could be effective this coming season for Carolina. I like his size. I like what he brings to the table. Same thing with, Jordan Hall having another year in the system, maybe gets a little better. Miles McVay potentially gets a little better, but this is another unit where Carolina is going to have to hit the portal hard in order to rebuild this offensive line, because I get it. You like the guys that you're getting out of the high school ranks, and maybe those guys are going to be part of the rotation. A good majority of them are going to be part of the rotation. You've got to bring in some veteran guys that can compete with them. And hopefully these are high-level guys. One of the things that we've been told from this staff is that they just didn't go out and get a bunch of talent this year in the transfer portal. A lot of it was them going out and just getting guys, getting bodies that could fit in that room just to hold us over until they could get to this offseason where they would really hit the transfer portal and look for big, big names. So I'm interested to see what they do along that offensive line, because they need to be better than they were this year. So it's really all about getting a lot more talent in there. But, at the same time, there is a crop of freshmen that, could show up on campus and be very impactful. So they're going to have to balance that. I think, this is going to be one of the main focuses. And so again, what we're seeing here coming into focus is the positions that really Carolina has to hit in the transfer portal. I think quarterback, linebacker very clearly after today, and offensive line, which I think was a need before today. And I think, with Norwood entering, probably gets highlighted just a little bit more, because, the other thing that you got to prepare for is you don't know how many other guys are going to leave. I mentioned at linebacker, Evan Bennett is a guy that just hasn't played. There's guys along this offensive line that haven't played that didn't play this year. There's other guys like Aiden Banfield, who was kind of phased out of the rotation. Now, what's interesting to try to figure out with him was there an injury towards the end of the season that ultimately led to him being sidelined, or was he on the availability report because Carolina was simply just not giving him a jersey? So, there are some guys that held over from Mac Brown's time, Trey Blue, along that offensive line, a guy that can play really either position for Carolina, but I think probably projects more as a guard. Same thing with Byron Nelson. That's another guy that did the exact same thing. And then Peter Pisansky, that's a guy that transitioned mid-season from the defensive line to the offensive line. Are those guys willing to stick around, or could some of those depth guys enter too? And that's when you really start getting into the conversation. That's why you got to really start thinking about going out and getting some of these guys in the transfer portal at these positions. The other departure today that, you guys may have missed, and you can go and read about it on the website, Ty White, the defensive back, guy that, provided a lot of versatility, was a guy that played a little bit in the nickel. That's where he played most of his snaps, but also played a little bit on the outside, played a little bit in the box as a safety. He could do just about everything for Carolina in this backfield. Former 4-star recruit. So a guy that had a lot of talent at one time, and not really sure why exactly, he never got on the field this year, especially, again, you look at some of the guys that Carolina rotated through, when they were going through having Caleb Cost off the field during one game. Jaden Patterson was a guy that certainly filled in admirably during that one game, but then Thaddeus Dixon gets hurt in that game, and we saw Trey Miller. Trey Miller struggled in that game, and, then you finally get a look at Ty White, and he gets beat quite a few times in that one, but that was the only real experience that Ty White had out on the field. Didn't play much on special teams either this year, which I think with that reduced role really was a big part of why he ends up entering. If he would have been someone that would have been a part of that special teams unit, maybe he doesn't end up entering his name. But certainly a talented young player that I think hopefully will find a good home and a place where he can actually play maybe it's a group of 5 school, maybe it is a Power 5 school, but certainly a guy that I think you'll look at years down the line, and maybe look at and say to yourself, why didn't we see this guy a little bit more this year? But now, you look at the nickelbacks. I think that room in pretty good shape. Caleb Cost is expected to come back next year. Now, he only has 1 year of eligibility left, so that's one of the main things to remember about him. But then also, you are going to have Trey Miller return if he wants to. That's another guy that could be on watch to potentially enter the transfer portal. Jaden Patterson is certainly someone that can play that position as well, although I think they're probably going to need him a little bit more on the outside to fill one of those cornerback spots. He did really good this year in that field safety or that field corner spot. That's certainly something that I think Carolina is hoping that he can do for them again next year and maybe lessen the needs in the transfer portal for them. But, someone of Ty White's ability is certainly not going to be the easiest to replace. The good news is that Carolina's got a bunch of guys coming in at the high school level, especially at the cornerback spot. That's the one area that you don't really have to worry about this group at. CJ Sadler in the nickel is certainly someone who could get some run next year. He's going to be splitting time between the offensive and defensive side of the football. There's a couple other smaller corners in this class that could end up playing in the nickel for Carolina. A guy like Jaziel Hart, who played a little bit on the outside at the high school level, but certainly someone that you could see move to the inside for Carolina. And then, a couple of the other guys that Carolina brought in this class at the safety position, guys like Jamarian Gordon, who split his time between corner and safety. That could be another guy that you could look at there. But I think mainly the real pickup here in terms of the signees out of the high school ranks is the fact that they went out and got CJ Sadler. That should give you a little bit of comfort on where exactly Carolina is at in the defensive back room. Don't think that's going to be a position they're going to need to hit nearly as hard in the transfer portal. Maybe they go out and get somebody that can be a starter for them at that cornerback position. But I do think that they are going to give an opportunity to a guy like Kenton Dobson to come in and win that starting job out there at that boundary corner spot where Marcus Allen played last year. So if he's able to do that, well, then Carolina's got a really good opportunity to potentially grow this season. And maybe you bring in a depth guy like that can just help out. But that's far from a guarantee that a guy like Dobson is just going to be able to hit straight out of high school. Love his potential, but we've seen it before that especially when you force guys into roles early in their careers that they aren't necessarily ready for, it does lead to guys struggling a little bit. We saw that at times. I mean, you go back to Patrice Renee when he was at Carolina, really forced onto the field too early. Carolina goes away from him for a few years and then eventually circles back around to him. But you're trying to avoid that type of situation. Allow these guys to really build themselves up. So I would personally hit the transfer portal if I'm Carolina. Go and find me a starting corner. And like we said, it's really a list that's starting to add up. And we'll see. There are going to be more guys that are going to enter their names into the transfer portal. And we'll have to, come on here and react to those guys as well. But I don't know if we're going to feel nearly the type of impact that we felt today with a starting linebacker entering. I don't know if there's going to be anybody of that significance that's going to enter the rest of the time for Carolina, but it'll be interesting, and we'll be covering on the website for you guys, HeelTopBlog.com. Make sure you head over there right now and check out all the coverage that we have for you guys on all of the transfers that Carolina has had so far in this that there were guys that have already said so far that they are entering the transfer portal from this 2025 team. We'll, of course, have you covered with any of the guys that Carolina is going to have on campus for a visit. There is one guy out of the Division II level that Carolina at one time was talking to. Not sure whether or not that's still going on, but a defensive end, an edge rusher out of Livingstone College. So a guy from this local area that Carolina is potentially interested in. One of the most productive defensive linemen in all of Division II, and definitely, at that level, but also all of college football. So certainly a guy that I think is very entertaining at this point for Carolina, very interesting. And hopefully Carolina will be able to go out and at least get him on campus for a visit. We'll start to see some of those guys roll into campus sooner rather than later. I'm not sure when exactly you can start taking visits. I don't know if it's after the portal officially opens on January 2nd. I think it might be because you have to wait until then to officially enter your name into the transfer portal. But because it's so long from now, there are going to be other names that are going to enter. So there will be other targets that will come up for Carolina. Of course, we'll have you covered on all of those over there at the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We've got you covered on all of the high school recruiting stuff that Carolina is doing right now. Just signed 39 players to their class yesterday. We're going to have a full breakdown of that class for you guys tomorrow. So make sure that you guys are here with us for that. We'll go more in depth. I mentioned some of those guys tonight, but we'll go more in depth on that group and talk about some of my favorite players from the class, some guys that I think could have impacts early for Carolina, which is going to be way more extensive than it's been in years past. So don't miss that. That'll be coming your way probably tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Going to have to make sure that and make sure it lines up with our preview for the Georgetown game, because that's coming up on the basketball side of things. So make sure that you guys are keeping tabs on all the stuff that we're doing here on the Twitter page, the Facebook page, and the YouTube page. Make sure you go over to that YouTube page, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any editions of either the Heel Tough Blog podcast or the Four Corners podcast. Also over on the website, we'll be getting you ready for the game that Carolina basketball has on Sunday against Georgetown. They're coming off a huge win against Kentucky. Make sure you go back and check out that article for us. And then one other thing that we want to point you guys to, in terms of the basketball side of things, is going to be that Georgetown preview and that Georgetown recap. We'll have you covered with all of that stuff with all those games throughout the remainder of the season. So make sure that you guys are locked in on the Heel Tough Blog website. Best place to follow us on social media is at Heel Tough Blog. Make sure you turn on those post notifications, because when you do, you will get all of those. You'll get a notification whenever we post anything to that page, and all of those posts are specific to our stuff. It's just our content. We don't retweet anything else on there. Even during National Signing Day, wasn't retweeting the Carolina football account. That's the personal page where you can follow us at HTV Anthony, as you guys see right there. But the Heel Tough Blog page is the perfect avenue for all of our content. So make sure that you go over there and are following that page for us. But that's going to close it down for tonight's edition of the podcast. We'll talk to you tomorrow night on the Heel Tough Blog podcast, where we will dive into that 2026 class. But for tonight, I want to say thank you guys for listening, watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.